Okay, hello everyone. My name is Richard, and I'm a passionate Android developer. This talk is about going 100% Compose Multiplatform, and according to some websites, YouTube videos, blogs, this should be rather easy. But the reality is that it's sometimes harder and trickier than it seems. There are actually downsides that no one tells you, or when you want to start Compose Multiplatform at your company or for your private project. This talk, just to make that as a note, is for Compose Multiplatform 1.6.11, which is currently the latest one. There is 1.7.0 in alpha released yesterday night. So yeah, some parts may not be up to date for that alpha version, but still, it just shows how fast things move. Also, as a small prerequisite, this talk assumes that you are knowledgeable in Compose, on Android at least, and already use it or have been using it. So it's an UI-heavy talk. There's stuff that is related to UI. It will not cover your dependency injection, your networking, persistence layers, and stuff like that. And also the showcases are mostly for Android and iOS. I know there's also WASM and desktop, but usually these are the biggest two that we want to support as mobile developers, at least for now, in Compose Multiplatform. Let's start with the first step. We go from basic to deep. The first step would be the wizard to set up your project. Some would assume that you would use the plugin that is available to you in Android Studio. Don't. It only supports Android and iOS. And if you're looking for WASM support and or desktop support, there is a better solution out there, and it's also up to date. So the plugin is old, and the website that JetBrains provides is actually up to date. You can also implement server there, WASM, which is still in alpha, and you can be a full stack developer that you always wanted to be. Let's start with navigation. Rather new, the Jetpack Compose navigation was ported to KMP some weeks ago, or now maybe some months ago. Keep in mind, this is still experimental. There is not everything working. It's not everything in there that you would expect from the Android navigation to work, and it has some limitations. For example, deep links are not supported, at least in the first release, and the backhandler is also another thing that is currently not supported in Compose Multiplatform, with the latest stable version, that is. There are some other third parties. Those are also mentioned on the website, Voyager, Decompose, Apix, and Precompose, that you can use. So if the Jetpack navigation doesn't fit your needs, you can always go to one of those. They are all great libraries. Some are basic or simpler to implement, and some are harder to implement but have more capabilities and depth and functionality. With every navigation, there is somewhat of a life cycle and also a view model to separate your logic. There is, again, the Jetpack Compose version, which was around 2 months ago, released 2 months ago, just right before the Kotlin Conf. So yeah, I had to change my presentation too. And again, it's also experimental, or again, it doesn't make sense because they're released together. But if you want to use it with, let's say, Coin, you also have to use the latest Coin version, which is 3.6.0, which is, again, in alpha. So not stable, but probably stable enough. When you want to use collect the state with lifecycle or your lifecycle event effects, then don't forget to import your dependency. And also there's currently an issue where you have to put your own lifecycle owner in there to make it actually work with the version. 1.7 should fix that one. Up next, there is the Android lifecycle that we all know and love, which is ported to Compose Multiplatform. Desktop has the full implementation, as you can see on the Android one. WASM, for example, skips the created state and the destroyed state because the web page is either opened or the tab is closed. So that doesn't exist. And for our iOS developers out there, if there are some, This is the mapping between iOS and Android lifecycle that you will see and get represented in Compose Multiplatform. Again, if this view model and lifecycle of Chat by Compose doesn't fit your needs, there are these 4 libraries that do the job, and they are kind of stable enough to do that. Let's talk resources, meaning strings, fonts, images, and so on. There is this thing called Compose resource, which is rather new. You create a Compose resource folder within your common main folder, and there you can put all your values, your drawables, your strings, stuff like that in, and you can configure the Compose resources to have, for example, the generated resource class being public, and you can use it across multiple modules. Currently, there are only 3 qualifiers that Compose Multiplatform supports, one being language, theme, and the other one being, or the last one being density. Just a small catch-up or hiccup. The theme is light and dark, while on Android it's night and non-night or no night, I think. Otherwise, the qualifiers are kind of identical to Android. There's support for most of the resources that you know and use, so strings with Unicode characters, placeholders, line breaks, and so on. Plurals work as you would expect, being English, having no 0, but using the 1 and other as a plural variant. And you can also import images and use those, for example, WebP and so on. You can also use SVG, just not on Android, as you are used to. But you can convert your SVGs to Android XML and use that for all your targets, being iOS, Android, desktop, doesn't matter. But there is even a better way. There are 2 dependencies listed here, where you can actually convert your SVGs to image vectors and then use those directly as you would do with the material icons. I personally use the upper one. Feel free to give them a try. They are generating pretty good stuff. Another big topic is image loading, and this is, again, something that is already working and stable. So there are 2 big main players, one being Coil and the other one being Camel. Coil had a cool logo, Camel didn't, so I made them one. Anyways, for Coil you need 3.0 plus, which is an alpha. It's rather stable, both versions are stable, both versions are good, so you can use that, and you have your image loading from the network, perfectly fine. More and more companies also require apps to be accessibility conform. It's a big topic, a broad one. There's also the European Accessibility Act coming within 2025. So you're kind of enforced to respect accessibility. Accessibility is a big topic. It covers colors, font, contrast, and such. So these are usually topics that your designer should handle. So I will not talk about that one, but I will focus on the system part, which is TalkBack on Android and VoiceOver on iOS. When I started with this presentation, VoiceOver support was not given in Compose Multiplatform. It was not there. Then they put it on the roadmap for 2024, they being JetBrains, and now it's in and it works perfectly fine. So there is support for VoiceOver on iOS. That being said, this is true for a real device. If you're using a simulator and you want to use the accessibility inspector on your macOS to test stuff and to play back everything, it's a little bit tricky because the simulator is not really in voiceover mode, so it doesn't recognize your voiceover texts. You have to put it into always, then it scans always, but then it reads everything multiple times whenever your view recomposes. So I would, if you test VoiceOver on iOS, test it on a real device. Speaking of accessibility, it's kind of linked, at least on Android and iOS. So if you set test tags on Android, And if you have test tags as resource IDs on Android, then all your composable test tags will be converted to view IDs, and our QA can run Maestro tests, touch that view ID, and being, oh, I want to click button ID, whatever, and it works. On iOS, that is also translated to the accessibility identifier tag, so that also works, and there is no issue with that. Just maybe a small catch-up that on Android, when you use the navigation dialogues, that don't forget to set your test tags as resource ID, because if there is a dialog being opened and you only have it set once within your activity, because you're all using single activity pattern here, then you would have to set it again on that dialog's content to have test tags enabled. Keyboard and input is probably the part where the implementation of Compose Multiplatform kind of switches to, let's struggle a little bit. Everything kind of works on Android, iOS, web, and desktop as expected, like your actions, IME types, and so on. There is no support for basic text field 2 right now. It should come in 1.7. There is basic support on desktop, I think. But yeah, 1.7, the alpha was released yesterday night, so let's hope for stuff to come. There is a lot of issues on GitHub, but for example, your iOS view recomposes whenever the keyboard is shown. So there are kind of some issues. If you're doing a basic application, you will probably not run into anything mention-worthy. You can also assume that the same is true for modifiers, that every modifier that you use is also available in Compose Multiplatform, and you're usually correct. Just some very specific ones are missing, and those are usually system-related. So, for example, there is motion event spy that I'm using to read motion events but not touch them on my children. This is available on Android, doesn't exist on Compose Multiplatform. If you want to also cover multiple screen sizes, then you want to use window size classes. On Android, at least that is the case for material free, and you would assume that this is also there in Compose Multiplatform, but it isn't. There is an open issue. But Chris Baines came to our rescue and said, hold my beer, I got this. And he made a library and copied the material-free window size classes and made it work for multi-platform. And also it has WASM experimental support. So yeah, shout out to Chris, being awesome. And then there is a big question. For Android developers, it's like, oh, I'm using an IDE. I know Android Studio, it's probably the only IDE I need, right? And if I ever do any Swift stuff or iOS stuff, I would use Xcode, right? Why would I need any other IDE? Which is kind of true for now, I would say. So one big player being Android Studio, and runs on IntelliJ. It requires the Compose Multiplatform plugin to make everything work. There is only the biggest downside that you have no direct Swift support within that IDE. There are plugins that you can use. I did not yet. And there is the other big player that was also mentioned by other colleagues or by JetBrain guys, which is Fleet. It's still in preview, and it's free for now until it's out of preview, I think. So use it, you can try it, you can fall in love with it, and at some point you can pay for it. It's under heavy development, so don't expect everything to work or even be there. Just for an example, Lockheed support was added around a month or two ago. Yeah, but it has its biggest upsides. For example, you can debug Swift code, but we will get to that. Fleet does one smart trick, and it's called also smart mode. So it downloads IntelliJ and Xcode for you, and it leverages both to enable that you can use Swift and Kotlin code within one IDE. The next big part I want to show, and this is kind of related to IDEs and not yet perfect in Compose Multiplatform, are previews. So in Android Studio, we are treated really well with the live previews for composables. If you ever fall into that hole and you love those previews, you will be missing them in Compose Multiplatform. So they don't just simply work. You have to write them in your Android main source folder. I put the full qualifier name here for the preview, so this is the Android X version, to make that one work within Android Studio. It would work, or does work, if that's the case for at least Compose resources. As soon as you use Compose resources, it no longer works and it shows you an error. Luckily, this got fixed, and yeah, as I said, released yesterday night. So if you go to the latest version, it should be fixed. And then you should have your previews. The only downside is you have your composable within common main and your preview within Android main. If you want to have two files, feel free. I would hate it. Good. Another solution would be to leverage the desktop preview. So it would require you to have the desktop target, the JVM target, and to use this annotation, you can simply expect your desktop preview annotation, and within your desktop target dependencies, you would then have the desktop preview that automatically overrides this one. As soon as you have that, you will see a small icon next to your function that on click will show you a preview window. Just saying this preview window is static, light mode, and whatever desktop is showing you. So there are no updates to it until you click that icon again. And there is the third one, which is Fleet, so different IDE. The story there is a little bit different. So if you use Compose Multiplatform preview annotations, again, this is another full qualified domain name here, you automatically get the icon next to the function. You can click that icon, and once you click it, you see also the preview window. When you change stuff within your composable code, it runs or builds everything and then shows you the update. So it's a plus side, it's better, but again, it's just a static image. So you can't click, you can't drag, you can't live edit as you are used to on Android Studio. I don't know what the future brings. Let's hope something good. Another topic would be debugging. And within Android Studio, debugging is, of course, no issue for Android. But for iOS, the story is a little bit different. So if you want to debug iOS apps, you have to enable the experimental setting, and that should work, but only for Kotlin code, that is. So you can't debug your Swift code, as far as I'm aware of. Within Fleet, the story is different. You can debug whatever you want. You can debug Kotlin, you can debug Swift, iOS, and Android. So here, Fleet is clearly superior and awesome. At some point with Compose Multiplatform, you will probably be required to implement native UI, because not everything exists within Compose Multiplatform. Not every dependency that you are using has a Compose Multiplatform variant. Let's pick Maps, for example. You want to use Mapbox or Google Maps or the native MapKit, or I don't care. Let's pick Mapbox. That one just has no Compose Multiplatform variant. So you probably want to use that. One way of doing that is within your iOS main, you can use CocoaPods. You can implement or add that CocoaPod to your project and make use of it. There is no Swift package manager support as of yet, at least. And the biggest challenge to it is that it only works with Objective-C code or with Swift code that is annotated with Objective-C. Otherwise, you will not see that code. There are possible solutions that you can use to wrap your Swift code, add the attribute yourself, and then publish that as a library again and use it. I would rather go with injection here, but not for UI. One more thing maybe to add, there is a Kotlin plugin for Swift Package Manager. I have not used it yet. So it will support Swift Package Manager, but again, not Swift, because that's a Kotlin issue right now. If you want to use, let's say, UIKit views, then you have a UIKit view, which is similar to the Android view. This is the official example on the documentation. It shows a map, or the mapkit map. It's rather short, and yeah, this is the map you implement on your iOS main source directory. You could also do the same for, let's say, a video player, as you can see on the right side. It's fine as long as you use the Apple-specific view, video player or map kit. But as soon as you want to use, let's say, Mapbox, it's probably different. You can also use SwiftUI. There is the official example for SwiftUI usage, which is even more basic, at least the documentation. And it requires you to create your UI view controller. With that view controller, it's listed that you pass that down into your Kotlin function. So there is one big problem, which is as soon as you have a big stack or screen stack, navigation stack or screen stack, you would have to pass down that lambda pretty far. I don't know if you would like to have that. And the second one being with UIKit view and your view controller view, there is the update function, but how to actually call my factory now to update my stuff. There is now a sample project that I have as a QR code here. Still, it will be at the end of the presentation, so you don't need to scan it now. And this project implements Mapbox for UIKit and SwiftUI. It's just a showcase that you can at least give a try. So first, you would expect your map functionality. It has content padding and polygons, and those parameters are the ones that I update in this example. Your actual implementation will then be within iOS main source, and there is a Boolean switch that you can use to switch back and forth between UIKit and SwiftUI, or just look at the stuff that you need. So to go a little bit deeper into that implementation, I will show the SwiftUI one that I did, and I created a factory that returns the view controller, as you can see in the bottom left here. That factory has two state flows to have some changes be emitted to that SwiftUI. So it has my polygons and my content padding. The factory itself will be set within the SwiftUI apps init struct, and I only have one helper function, one for SwiftUI and one for UIKit, and both for my map. So if you have multiple views that you need to render natively, then you will have to also, or you can use a helper function or do something else. This is maybe a pattern that you want to use. Within my iOS main composable, I will then remember the factory, so it's not recreated all the time, adding my state flows, and then I will combine and ensure that with those state flows, I can update and retrigger the changes to my polygons and my content padding. If we move over to our SwiftUI implementation, so this is code that you have probably never seen before, Swift code, it is that we first create a function, to return that factory. And then we will use that function within our iOS abstract. You can see that it's using the state flows, but here it's converted the Swift state flows. So it uses TouchLab Sky to have better Swift or better state flow support within Swift. The class that we create, which extends the factory interface, has the UI view controller that it has to return, and within its init block, we forward the state flow to our custom Swift UI map. And to construct the Swift UI map view, we have again our init block with both Sky state Swift flows, and those we store and will later await on to update our Swift UI. So this is just the basic setup. And if we go down a little bit deeper within our Swift UI code, it's shrunk down a little bit. You can see we have the Swift UI states. So these are the add state annotated states on Swift UI. When you update those, Swift UI will also update and kind of recompose your stuff. Using Swift UI, we can run a task on our Sky state flows. And whenever we get an update on one of those two values, we then update the Swift UI state. And finally, within our Swift UI, we have our Swift UI Mapbox map. And within that map, we update the polygons that we are using. So it shows those polygons on the map. TouchLab also has a blog post where they show their implementation. They also use view models. So instead of having a state flow to communicate, they communicate via view model. It's also a valid point. No matter what fits your needs, these are just some current possible solutions to have UIKit and or Swift UI within your Compose code. Take whatever fits your needs. I guess this is probably something for the future to be recommended at least. Sometimes you also want your app to look like iOS because it should look like iOS. At least maybe your designer wants it to look like iOS. There's an amazing library out there called Compose Cupertino. You can wrap your Compose code, so your buttons within a Cupertino button, and then it just restyles everything to make it look like iOS. So let's summarize the current state of Compose Multiplatform once more. You have your IDE decision to make. Are you using Android Studio with Xcode? Maybe just Fleet, maybe all three of them switch back and forth. How about the previews? Will you like them with an Android Studio, the way they looked? Would you rather split the files? There's also the big downside, kind of, that Compose Multiplatform will always be behind the Android Compose implementation. Around 2 or 3 months is what they say. And you will always have the newest and latest and hottest stuff a little bit later. There is also no desired solution for native UI yet. And there's Swift Package Manager coming at some point, and maybe also Swift support at some point, but this is what the future tells us. Should you convert your full project to Compose Multiplatform? I don't know, it's up to you. And speaking of iOS, how do you actually bring your iOS colleagues on board or your web colleagues on board if you do it for web? At least for iOS, I can tell you that Kotlin is not too different from Swift. If you can read one, you can read the other. If you understand one, you can understand the other. And with online stuff, you can always learn the other parts. Compose is somewhat similar to Swift UI. It's not fully similar, yes, but there is one big upside, which is Compose is backwards compatible. So when you have a new version, it works on every device, while for Swift UI, that is not true. If you have to support really low versions, then you can't even do basic stuff within Swift UI. how to keep actually up to date, because Compose Multiplatform is a fast-moving topic. JetBrains is super fast developing new stuff. There are blog posts that they have. You have the Compose Multiplatform GitHub page where you can check the releases when they are out. There are new videos on the Kotlin's YouTube channel that are really good examples on how to do stuff and how to be up to date. There are amazing videos from KotlinConf that you can check. There are also amazing speakers at droidcon and KotlinConf, so people that you can follow on whatever platform that you desire. There are Google people out there that answer really fast. Feel free to call them or not, write them on whatever platform that you find them. They're really helpful, usually. If you prefer written help and you want to chat with someone, there is always the Kotlin community, but also there is an amazing Slack channel where people are really fast to help you and answer your needs. And last but not least, if you're looking for some libraries that help you leverage your Compose multiplatform or even Kotlin multiplatform, that is with persistence layers, databases, stuff like this, there is Klibs, which is rather new, and there is KMP Awesome, which is now older, but also has some libraries that are no longer really up to date, maybe in it. So these are just two websites that you can use and leverage for yourself. Thank you very much. Just one more thing. There is the sample screenshot again, the QR code. And also on the right side, you can see a video being played, which is just this sample project. This has custom fonts in it. It has a navigation, view model, stuff like this, but also the video player implementation and also the map implementation for UIKit and SwiftUI. So if you have ever the desire to start Compose Multiplatform, and I would highly recommend doing that, then feel free to check out this project. Maybe it helps you in some points. And yeah, thank you very much.